I remember back in high school, our maths teacher was explaining to us the different levels of maths we could take up in the HSC in a couple of years' time. And my friend Mark, who was a champion sportsman, but academically only kind of average, in fact he was in one of the lower math grades at the time, said, I'm going to do the top one. I'm going to do the 4-unit maths, or extension 2 as we might call it now. And I remember trying to kind of, calm him down and say, oh mate, don't, that's pretty hard. Like really, that might be too hard for you. It's really only there's a small number of the top people end up doing that. And he was so angry at me. He was so angry at me for underestimating him that he then knuckled down and worked hard. He worked his way up the maths grades and ended up doing 4-unit maths. And he said later that part of his motivation was just to prove me wrong. Well, he went off and he did well in maths. He went off to uni, did engineering, and had a great engineering career. He travelled the world with his work and ended up meeting his now wife in Finland, and I later celebrated their wedding. And I've never been so glad to be proven wrong. Mark is a great example of someone who made great use of his abilities, even though they may have seemed limited or less at the time. And this is really what the gospel we hear at Mass today is about. We hear a gospel parable about people who are given different amounts of talent. Now, in the gospel, it actually means money, but we can use talent as an analogy today. Different amounts of ability, and it's around how they use those abilities. Now, we often, when we get these comparisons such as today, people who are given 1 or 3 or 5 talents, we often focus on those who are given the most and who seem to achieve the highest outcomes. We're very merit-focused, aren't we? But really the star of the show is the person in this gospel who gets only the 1 talent. They're the person they're given 1, but out of fear they bury it. And the judgment on them, the condemnation of them, is not that they only received 1 talent, it's that they didn't even use what they had. And so that talent is then stripped away and given to someone else in the end. The message for us is to make the most of what we have. That we all have something we can do. We all have something we can contribute. We often look to those, great stars. We look to the geniuses and the Einsteins, but perhaps we should be celebrating instead those who really struggle academically, those who fail subjects at uni, but sit those subjects again and redo them and finish the degree and go on to have a really productive career, making the most of what they've learnt. We look at the great athletes, who win medals and break records, but maybe we should look at those who overcome illness and injury and maybe less good genetics, but still manage to be people who are fit enough to, in their midlife, to be doing the gardening and running around the park chasing their grandchildren. That's physical success as well. We look at those who win awards and sing on stage, but maybe we should look at those who are only of modest talent, but those who join local musical societies and join church choirs and find ways to contribute their voice even in smaller ways. We celebrate we often look at great charismatic leaders, but there are many people who are more naturally shy or naturally less confident and yet are willing to put their hand up and step up to become the leader or the chair of the local committee or group somewhere, and in doing so, animate their community and make a great contribution. They're the people, the 1 talent people from this gospel parable, but they're the ones who actually make use of what they've been given. Now that's a pretty generic message, I guess you could hear in pretty much any state school around the place, any community service group saying, let's make the most of what we've got. But what is uniquely, I guess, Christian and Catholic about this is that in this gospel, of course, all these talents are given. They're not just a natural and innate, that we recognise God as the giver of all our abilities. And so our response, our using of our capacities, is part of our response to God. It is our faithfulness to God. And to refuse to use those gifts is a denial of what God has given. Now, God gives natural abilities. We might look and say, we talk about somebody having a God-given talent or a God-given ability, and we think, that is true. But God also gives things which are a little more subtle, which we call charisms. These are not natural abilities. These are things which seem to manifest when we place ourselves in God's hands. They are capacities in relationships, capacities in faith, in proclaiming. They are capacities often in creativity. They are capacities in justice and truth-telling and strength, which manifest when they are called upon. And so we find people who are willing to step up to perhaps be the carer in their family in a time of crisis. There are people who are willing to step up and be the volunteer or minister in their church. People who are willing to step up and take responsibility in their workplace when needed, who then look back and say, wow, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. And they discover it because it wasn't there in the first place. It was given to them when they stepped out in faith and said, Lord, here I am, use me. And then God does. God gives what we need in that moment. It's not just innate. It is given to us in the time we need it. So we look not just at our ability, but our usability in God's hands. So what does God want to do with us, and what will God equip us with? Well, it's not about the athletic or singing or superstar we might naturally think about talents being. It's around kingdom of God stuff. It's around justice. It's around love. It's around community. It's around truth, compassion, goodness. Things which create these things. This is kingdom of God stuff. And so this is what God will equip us with. And so let's recognize that when we feel a tug on our heart, or when we hear an invitation to step up and do good, that God will equip us if we say yes. If we say yes, God will help us. So many times as a pastor in a church, I've put out the call to say, parishioners, we're looking for people to help do such and such a project. And people say, oh no, there's other people who are better at that than me. I can't do that. But in fact, if we are willing to step up and say, yes, Lord, I will step into that space and give it a go, then God will give the charism. God will give the ability. God will give us what we need. And our challenge then is not to bury those talents, not to hide them, but say, yes, Lord, I believe that you can use me and you can do good things in and through me.